When it comes to memory management, ideally, programmers want memory that is large and fast and non-volatile, right? But when we look at the memory hierarchy, we realize that the smaller the memory, the faster it becomes, like cache, right? But one of the key aspects to managing memory is something called the memory handler. This is a process within the CPU that makes sure that the memory that is requested by specific CPUs is available upon request. The biggest reason is so that it avoids race conditions where processes fight for memory or hog onto memory resources, or even enter a state where processing cannot be advanced because of deadlock. Ultimately, any computer system has a memory management unit. And the memory management unit allows your memory to be organized in such a way that it allows for efficiency and optimization of memory usage. So when we look at the example that I have on screen, we have three techniques for organizing memory, right? Technique A looks at the user program and then the operating system in terms of random access memory. So the memory is segmented into two divisions, one allocated to RAM for the OS, the other allocated to different user programs. And the user programs are given precedence over the operating system. Secondly, we have something almost similar to the first, but the user programs are not given precedence. Precedence is given to the operating system. And most of our Windows operating systems operate like this. Memory allocation is given precedence to the operating system, and if there isn't any memory available, you're forced to shut down user programs so that they release memory for the operating system. Point 3 looks at the device drivers. Basically, these are available in ROM, which is your memory chips. It also has the user programs and the operating system operating in RAM. And contemporary systems exist like this. Your basic cell phones, your basic smart devices, TVs, etc. So this management of memory is dependent upon the architecture or architectural design. In some instances, we may have organization B working for us, but when we add on extra hardware, we need to move from B to a C allocation. For example, those of you that have worked with Arduino before, right? Or in the example that was done by Group 1 in the previous presentations, when they installed VirtualBox VMware, they dedicated a specific memory size for their virtual machine, which means that if they had 16 gig of RAM and they dedicate 4 gig, the laptop itself is only left with 12 gig to use. The remaining 4 gig are dedicated specifically for the VM. So we need to be able to understand how we partition this memory so that at the end of the day, we don't have gaps in memory that could have been used by a program lying idle. Do you understand? Let us look at something called fixed memory partitioning. When we look at memory, the general view is that memory is a single chunk. It's a big block, right? And different programs require different sizes of this chunk. So if you look at a simple queue, right? As the programs come and request for memory, they are allocated different memory size partitions depending on their needs. For example, this is our memory block. And our memory block is 800K, right? We have the operating system taking 100K, partition 1, 100K, partition 2, 200K, partition 3, 300K, and partition 4, 100K, right? Which means that if I have a CPU that wants to process 200K worth of objects, which of the partitions 1, 2, 3, or 4 is best suited? I'll put it in partition 2. Why? What's the size of partition 2? 200K, right? What's the size that's being requested? So 200 is equal to 200, which makes sure that this partition does not have any gaps when it comes to the memory. Do you understand? If I have another block, this block is 450. I now have partition 1, 3, and 4. Where would I put it? Someone says, I'll take some of the memory in partition 3. How big is partition 3? 300, right? Five, 6, 7. It's 300K, right? But this memory requires what? 450, right? So I am short of 150. Does that make sense? I would then take my 100, put it in partition 4. Does that make sense? Now I'm short of what? I'll take the remaining 50, put it in partition 1. But will I use the whole of partition 1? So I'm going to be left with a whole. Equal to 50K. Does that make sense? So if the next process 3, is, say for example, 60K in size, can it execute? No. It will have to wait for either process A or B to release a portion of the memory so that it is allocated the memory it needs. Does that make sense? That is the biggest disadvantage of fixed memory partitioning. It is not everyone that's going to require the fixed memory size. Do you understand, Ms. Newman? Take, for example, that drinking bottle of yours. You always come to school with that bottle full, 1 liter, right? But you usually drink 400 mils. So you're wasting 600 mils. Wouldn't it be better for you to just get a 600 ml bottle, put in 600 mils, release the 400 mils for Michael to drink? You see, you're making a claim for 1 liter, but out of the 1 liter, you only need 600 mils. Do you understand? Shall we move on? Okay. So, because of this problem, we have something called swapping. As processes come into memory, memory locations change, and memory allocations become variable. As processes leave memory, they release the memory allocation that was given to them, which also increases the pool of memory available for processes to execute. For example, if we take a look at diagram A, right? The memory allocation for the operating system remains fixed because you cannot boot it out of memory, you crash the system, right? Process A comes into play and it's given a memory allocation. We still have enough for process B. We still have enough for process C, right? But for process D, we don't have enough memory because the region of unused memory has become small. So what the system will do, it will wait for that process that was allocated memory at the beginning to complete execution and release memory. Does that make sense? Once it has released its memory, we now have enough memory to allow process D to come into play. But it is not using all the memory that has been released. Does that make sense? So now we have a problem where we have memory D hogging up some of the memory and memory allocation for C keeping also a small percentage of the memory. Notice how if these two memory blocks were continuous, we might have enough for memory for process E to come into memory. Does that make sense? We need to be in a position to understand that having fixed partitions is a problem because we will not use up all the memory that we have. So in essence, we need to look at swapping from a different perspective. When we look at swapping from a different perspective, let's say, if you look at the diagram, we allocate space for growing a data segment, right? When we give A space allocation, there, right? We will leave room for A to grow, given A might need extra memory. You understand? So this will be held for A. When process B comes, it's given a specific partition and space is held for B. It's like saying you want to go for an event. You take a position in an event, your plus one is late, and you save a chair for them. Does that make sense? The next person to come and sit in your row will sit on chair number 3. And if they have a plus one, they will reserve the next chair. So that the next person to come and sit will sit on chair number what? 5. Do you understand? So even chair number 3, 4, and 5 are in use. Chair number 2 is still going to be held for you. Are we together? So, can someone look up the word stack? Computing.
The linear data structure in which items inserted are removed in this order. So a stack data structure stored in the main memory that is manipulated using machine language procedure code-related instructions.
If we take the first definition, it's a data structure, right? And the objects are removed in a linear order, which is basically what comes in last is first to move out. Do you understand? Stack A is made up of a program data, and has been allocated room for growth. Stack B, also the same, the data, the stack itself, and room for growth. So if we're going to remove data from this stack, right, which of the two programs, A and B, would be removed first? We would remove B. That's how stacks operate. Do you understand? The biggest advantage of operating memory blocks in stacks is that when you remove your stacks, you leave room specifically for growth for the programs that remain. If we remove B, it means that this unallocated memory location is now going to expand upwards to the end of the block. So the next program to come in actually has more space to utilize. Or the program remaining can then get more memory to utilize. Do you understand? For example, have you ever noticed when you're copying a lot of things on your Windows device, the first object you're copying may be given 3 minutes. Next object, 5 minutes. Third object, 30. Ninth object, 1 hour 20. Right? Have you ever noticed that when the first object, for example, completes, the time is recalculated for all the other objects remaining? That which was given an hour may now be given 20 minutes. because on completion, more memory is now released to the remaining objects so that they can process faster. Do you understand? Right. Let's look at something called a bitmap. Basically, a bitmap is just a representation of data within a system using a diagram. We have 5 processes, and these 5 processes have the following bits. If you look at process A, process A has a 1 1 1 1 1 0 0 0, right? And when we look at our memory allocation has been segmented into 8-bit segments, right? Meaning to say, the first segment is 8 bits, isn't it? And the first process has 5 1 bits and 3 0 bits. Can you see that? If a 1 is a write and a 0 is a no write, it means that we have 3 no writes, henceforth we have a hole in our memory segment. My bad. If process B is to come in with 8 bits, right? The writes of 8 bits will begin from segment 9 to segment 16. So already, if we're going to draw a diagram, our diagram would be position 0, position 24. From position 0 to 5, we have process A, right? Up to segment 8, the memory hasn't been allocated to anything. Does that make sense? Then from segment 9 to segment 16, this has been allocated to B. Then when you look at segment C, up to 11, segment C, the next 2 bits out of 13 are empty. The next 3 bits up to 16, up to, 22 have an allocation. Look at how the programs themselves have become segmented. Look at C. Half is operating there, half is operating there. Where they could have been put into one stack, operate to completion, then get released. Do you understand? So according to bitmaps, whenever we have a bitmap, we draw this diagram that you see. Let me just zoom in. Depending on the segmentation process, right? Within the segmentation process, we then allocate our bits per segment, right? So where we don't have data being executed, this is known as a hole. Does that make sense? We want to avoid a memory location where we have more holes than we have continuous blocks of memory. Because when we look at these segments, the first one is worth 3 bits, the next one 2, the next one 3. This is 8 bits, right? If we would have compounded them towards one edge of the diagram, there will be enough for another process to execute. Have you ever sat on a bench? One person sits on the corner, they leave room, the next person sits, they leave room, the next person sits. Can we not just squash together and create room for another person to sit? But in as long as we do not compound our memory into one continuous block, it may be difficult for the next set of segments to be executed.